any wonder why I come to work energetically engaged every day? You look at the kids that you just heard from. It's really a remarkable place. Doesn't seem possible that I've been at Stanford for 5 years already. Parts of it have gone fairly quickly, and parts of it didn't move along quite so quickly. That first fall I was here and watched Washington State go back and forth on the football field. They were the only team picked below us in the league, and they had us down on our own field 26-0. And I was standing on the roof of the press box with my brother and my wife on either side, and my brother leaned over and looked at Candace, my wife, and said, "Keep an eye on him, he's thinking about jumping." And indeed, I did have the feeling that I hadn't perhaps asked enough questions. But since that time, we've had lots of fun, lots of success, and getting to come to work every day and work with people like the four you just heard from is really a blessing. We have tremendous people involved in our program. Great kids, 850 of them. We've got wonderful coaches that, and I have to tell you that NECA's answer on who influenced best, the classroom teacher or the coach, is so emblematic of a Stanford kid. I mean, she ought to go directly to the diplomatic corps and would be very successful at it. But thank you for having me here. I'm very, very pleased to have been invited. When I get a chance to talk about athletics, it's usually about Stanford athletics per se, and I'll do a bit of that. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the broader context, and particularly that broader context from an economic standpoint. And it's a very interesting time right now in intercollegiate athletics. And you know, the arms race is alive and well, and it can reasonably be said that the only thing worse than being in the arms race is not being in the arms race, because you quickly fall behind. And you look around our campus, we have some unbelievable facilities in support of our athletics programs. My job is really very simple and threefold. I have to try and develop and articulate the values of our organization, and fortunately the values are deep-seated and very much a part of the fabric of what Stanford has been over a long period of time. The second is to attract and retain the best people, and sometimes that's self-evident what we want to do, and other times it's not. And the third thing is trying to arm our coaches and staff and student athletes with the tools that it takes to be successful. And my duties every day are as simple as those. People have asked me, what's your average day like? And I've been at this 35 years, and I have yet to have an average day. Just about the time I think I'm going to have one, all hell breaks loose, and it's not average at all. But the key drivers in our business from an economic standpoint right now have been conference realignment and the massive television and multimedia rights that have been driving and fueling an awful lot of the growth in the business, and we're certainly involved with it as well. But before I talk a little bit about that, I think there are some things that have changed fairly rapidly over the breadth of my career, but there are also some things that haven't changed very much. Just a couple of quotes. Coaches are paid outlandish salaries, and it's hard to recognize where it might all stop. Presidents need to get control. No one else can bring this under control. Athletes are not real students. And cheating is rampant. It pays to cheat. All of those are quotes from the 1927 Boston Globe. Pretty amazing, isn't it? It rings true even now. The issues in 1906 when the NCAA was started are virtually the same as they are today. From an economics perspective, a lot changed in the 50s. There isn't any doubt about that, and that's the point which we started to make a little money and get a little exposure from television. And since that time, it has been a horse race to see who can spend the most and capture the most. And and get the most exposure. And probably the other watershed event was in 1982 when Oklahoma and Georgia sued the NCAA and got out from under the NCAA television contract. Indeed, at that point, we're in an open marketplace, and it's been a different world ever since. And the convergence of that open marketplace and the opportunity for all the distribution platforms that we now have available to us has really caused both the exposure and the money to climb. And it's almost counterintuitive that it would. There seems to be an almost insatiable appetite for televised sporting events, and yet even with that glut of inventory, we're able to continue to monetize it, and it's really quite remarkable. Athletics has been mostly self-supporting over the last 40 or 45 years. People have called upon athletics administrators to be entrepreneurial, and we're pretty good at it. The public consumes it. We're excited about it. Universities have used it in a variety of different ways, but one of the ways they've done it is they've used it as a social climbing device for the institution. Now, places like Stanford don't need that because our academic prowess and the extraordinary people we have here have worked rather nicely in moving us up in the esteem of higher education. But it's not that way for everybody. And intercollegiate athletics has been a way where Horatio Alger is alive and well in higher education, and it's most visible in intercollegiate athletics. As long as it's news, weather, and sports at 6 and 10, you can expect that institutions will use athletics within higher education for their own purposes. And so it's an interesting time. I don't know that 15 years ago, when I was in the middle of my time at the Big Ten, I certainly wouldn't have expected that we would ever, one, have a Big Ten network, or that the enterprise would be worth $2 billion, and that each of the institutions in the Big Ten would have $90 million in equity in a proprietary operation like that. And indeed, that's where we find ourselves now. When you think about conference expansion, not just anybody can join the Big Ten. You have to find somebody with a war chest like Nebraska has, because they're obviously not going to give away a $90 million equity position to somebody that doesn't bring their own set of abilities and resources. So before I talk about a little more about the multimedia and the conference expansion, I want to give you just a little bit of a frame of reference on Stanford. We are about a $75 million a year athletics enterprise, and in addition to the things that were mentioned earlier, we also manage all of the club sports on campus. It varies from year to year how many we have, but it's somewhere in the low 40s. We manage all of the physical education instructional programs on campus. We manage 94 recreational facilities of one sort or another around campus. All the pools you see, all the gym space you see, all of the green space you see where outside activities are taking place are managed by the Department of PE, Athletics, PE, and Recreation. So we're a fair amount more diverse. We also run the SPOT program, which is the Stanford Pre-Orientation Trips program. We take about 350 kids on trips away from campus right before school starts. We manage an extensive outdoor education and rental equipment operation, and we are involved in a lot of different things that don't readily come to mind with regard to athletics. But we're funded about $25 million a year from proceeds from our various endowments, which make us very unique in the marketplace. We garner about $25 million a year from gate receipts and departmental operations of one sort or another. We right now take in about $10 million a year from NCAA distributable revenue, Pac-10 distributable revenue, and other sorts of things from TV and multimedia. We raise about $10 million in annual gifts from friends and alumni of the university, and about another $5 million from other various and sundry sources. So You already heard a little bit about the sports offerings and the 800 student athletes. We've got it's a big program, but without that endowment, that first element, we would have been 18 or 20 programs a long time ago. It has allowed us to do some things that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And the fact of the matter is, we're really quite different as a result of that endowment, because when I was at the University of Iowa, 96.5% of what we took in every year in revenue was derived directly or indirectly from football and men's basketball. That's where it came from. Now, some of it was contributions, some of it was television, some of it was gate receipts, but generally speaking, almost 100% of it was coming from those two sources. Here at Stanford, about 70% of our budget is in the form of scholarships, grants and aid for students, and salaries. And so those are formulaically driven every year, and when we have a 3% increase in salaries and a 4.5% increase in tuition fees, room and board, which is fairly modest by higher ed standards right now, it's between $2 million and $2.5 million in new money every year. So you're going to hear a little bit about the enormous numbers that are going to be derived from other conferences' multimedia activities, and I'll do a little bit of forecasting on what we might get when we go to market a little later this year. But the fact of the matter is, the run rate is high and the escalation is high, and the escalation comes in areas where we really don't have very much control. We either cut the number of scholarships we have, or we get rid of some people, and obviously that's what we had to do a couple of years ago. We laid off, either laid off or through attrition, downsized about 35 positions. Those things are painful. Well, you know, institutions of higher education are really good in expansion, but they aren't very good in contraction. And so we were like everyone else. It was a bloodletting to get that done. But I'm glad we got on the front side of it, and now that we're kind of getting on the back side of it, we're gonna have a chance, I think, to look pretty good before too long. So obviously we're very dependent upon our endowment yield. When the downturn happened 24 months ago or thereabouts, we went from harvesting $28 million a year off our endowments to $21 million a year. $7 million in annual cuts is essentially what we had to come up with. We are very dependent upon annual expendable gifts. We spend a lot of time on it. We have 13 FTEs devoted to fundraising and stewardship and all the things that go along with that. And obviously that's very tied to the economy. So the very things that caused the downturn in the endowment are also reflected in what we can raise. And our largest single guaranteed revenue, generated revenue source is football gates, and it's tied to a product that, quite frankly, hasn't been very good over a long period of time. We've had 10 winning seasons in the last 31 years. That's not exactly the kind of tradition that I think we want going forward. And so on a local basis, on a micro basis, we work hard and we have a lot of advantages. We have some disadvantages. We spend almost $22 million a year in transfers to the university on behalf of scholarship costs for student athletes. And it's real money. We pay it for room and board, we pay it for tuition and fees, we pay it for books. And it's a recurring cost, and we love investing in it, but it's not cheap. And so those are the things that challenge us on a local basis. But let's talk a little bit more about the multimedia and the conference realignment, because that's really what is driving a lot of what's going on right now. Many of you, I'm sure, followed the process of expansion in the Pac-10. We began the process that was actually initiated by the University of Texas to talk about a big plan that would have brought in somewhere between 4 and 8 new members into the Pac-10, and we were quite pointed in our comments to people that expressed an interest, and the elements of that pointedness were basically, you are joining the Pac-10. This is not a merger. We have a very well developed and long-standing history of doing our own compliance and enforcement work in the league.